we want to build something of value that's enduring. We started as a project, and then we've gone from a project to a boutique. As a venture firm, now I think we're making a conscious decision to build an institution. Partnerships, when they're done well, work really well because the partners have different strengths and weaknesses, and you can talk about things in a very constructive way. If you bring newer people into the organization as partners, how do you get out of the way so that the newer people are capable of succeeding without you kind of breathing over their necks? But if the personal brand is too strong, and I would argue Kleiner had a really good brand and John had a really good brand, but you then have to figure out how to get the other people in the organization to also rise up. How do you build a system inside of a firm to allow those conversations to flourish without people feeling bad? Because if you can do that, you build a really strong core side of the firm. I fall into it's much better to be in a firm. Now, the problem with being in a firm is you often have to deal with things that you may not want to deal with. You have to share with other people, right? A solo GP can move fast, but there is no reason why a good firm can't also move fast.
Welcome back to Understanding VC. I'm your host Rahul. Understanding VC is a perpetual MBA on a single subject, venture capital. Today I'll be having an in-depth conversation on building enduring VC firms and succession planning with Hussein Kanji. Hussein is a partner at Hoxton Ventures, an early-stage VC firm based in London. Prior to Hoxton, he was an associate with Axel Partners. Now let's talk to him. Hi Hussein, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Rahul. Thanks for having me.
So, do you think Hoxton is going to be around in next 20, 30 years?
It's a good question. I think if you'd asked me 4 or 5 years ago, I wouldn't have given you very much of an answer. I mean, I am hoping I'm successful enough that I don't have to be working 20, 30 years from now. I am in my mid 40s, and so 20, 30 years from now would put me in my mid 60s or my mid 70s, right? And you think of venture firms typically as one of two things. Either they're institutions or they're shells around the person who's writing the check. And I would have probably defaulted into the second, which is it was a shell around me. So, you have a firm or, you have a company or a fund, but it's not a company or a fund in and of itself. It's a company and a fund to enable you to do your job. And then once you're done with your job, right, there's not much of a reason for the company or the fund to exist anymore because the company and you, the fund and you are intrinsically linked in that sense. I think 4 or 5 years ago, we started thinking about this. And I think, when you're thinking about the next years, it's not going to be you. 20, 30 years from now, Hoxton is not going to be me. And then the question is, do you separate you from the firm? And if so, then do you want the firm to continue? I don't think that's my decision as the founder. I think that's the decision of the people that we hire. And the one thing that we were definitely doing as a company is we needed to hire some people because we were running out of capacity. And we just, to do venture well, it has to be more than one or two people around the table. Partnerships, when they're done well, work really well because the partners have different strengths and weaknesses, and you can talk about things in a very constructive way. But it's really hard, by the way, to do that. That's a whole topic in and of itself, and how to create partnership culture that's open and transparent and honest and doesn't withhold. But then as you look to add people to the partnership, and it really becomes more their choice as to whether they want Hoxton to be there for 20 or 30 years. And we've added two people in the last year into the firm, both of whom are emphatic, if they had a choice, they very clearly in one camp, is they want the firm to be an institution. So I'm probably more neutral about this. For me, it's a shell, but for them, it's we want to build something of value that's enduring. There was a time in Europe where there were no venture firms. We came into that and we started as a project. And then we've gone from a project to a boutique as a venture firm. We're a good boutique. But the question now is the boutiques don't last, right? Because boutiques are very tied to the people who are in the boutique. Is now I think we're making a conscious decision to build an institution that, and if you build the institution for even 10 years into the future, it would be a really bad institution or weak institution if it doesn't exist 20 or 30 years into the future. And kind of by definition doesn't then exist for like 50 to 100 years into the future. So I think we're trying to build like an enduring firm, that starts in Europe, on the basis that there was no one doing this well in Europe and on the early stage side, but become something much bigger than that over time because it's trying to invest in itself and build something at scale.
Yeah, but yeah, why don't a lot of people do this? Like try to build an institution.
It's really hard. It's not like a corporate. These are partnerships, and partnerships work well when the partners are involved, and eventually the partners get less involved, right? Because if you're successful, you don't necessarily want to be as involved anymore, right? You want to go and do other things with your life. Like there's like working and making money and great investing, but there's like 1,000 other things that you can do with your life, including a whole bunch of like civic stuff and charitable stuff. Like, so people bow out of the partnerships, and because they're partnerships, not corporates, finding replacement people, like replacement partners into the firm, that are equally good, and partnerships are unique structures, right? It's like, think about like replacing your wife, like, or your husband. Like it's not like you can pick anyone off the street and kind of make it work. There's it's difficult to do, and then if you bring newer people into the organization as partners, how do you get out of the way so that the newer people are capable of succeeding without you kind of breathing over their necks? And obviously, if you built a partnership, there's always going to be a deference to you because you kind of helped create this thing. And there's always going to be some motivation for you to kind of reap the reward of the institution that you're building. But if you reap too much of the reward, and I would argue if you reap like any of the reward into the future, then the younger talent like doesn't want to be there anymore, right? They go off and build their own fund, especially these days where it's actually very easy to build a fund. And then how do you get out of the way when so they can make their own decisions and to some degree like kind of make their own mistakes. And most of venture, like it's a power law industry, right? So a very small handful of companies drive the returns, which means most of the time they're going to get it wrong. And then how do you let the people who are newer in the partnership, which is usually synonymous with younger as individuals, not make those mistakes, but also be allowed to make those mistakes without you getting in the way. Like it's just really hard. And most venture firms, I think there are very few that have like transitioned from one generation to another, and then one generation to another, and then one generation to another again, without losing like the pedigree or the status or the competitiveness of the firm. Like, they do the transitions, but they're not the same firm in the second generation or the third generation or the fourth generation. Like Kleiner used to be a phenomenal fund. Like when you thought about the two best funds in the world, it was Kleiner and Sequoia.
Yeah.
And I don't think Kleiner became like for a while it kind of fell off the map. Like it wasn't the same firm as Sequoia has always been the same firm, and Sequoia's done it really well. I think Greylock has done it pretty well. I think Axel has now done it pretty well a couple of times. But it's like hard, right, to do this stuff, and it's largely like this, like how do you empower? How do you find them, like the new partners? How do you empower them? And then how do you make sure the economics actually line up in the right way for everybody?
Yeah, and I think going with Kleiner, I think the personal brand of John Doerr is probably bigger than, and that helps. I mean that does not really help people who are coming in, right?
Yeah, so I think and Kleiner was so successful, like in its heyday, that the people became really. It wasn't just John; it was also Vinod Khosla, right? And so Vinod left to go do his own fund, Khosla Ventures, and John like ran the firm. And John was such a force of nature. And remember, Kleiner did a generational change, right? There was Kleiner, Perkins, Caulfield Byers, and they handed the keys over to John, like who then and Vinod, who then ran the firm, and then there wasn't a next natural step until very recently where it became Mamoon when he left Social Plus and joined. But like there was a time where Kleiner, like about 10 years, where John was not like in his 40s anymore. Like John was in his like 60s, like, and hadn't handed the keys over to this younger generation just yet. And there wasn't a next generation kind of heir apparent. Like it's hard, right? And like this is not like a small unknown firm. This is like this
The
was one.
biggest.
Yeah, this is like number one or number two, like depending on who back in the day it was Kleiner and Sequoia. Like so, if Kleiner can't figure it out, like this is a hard problem. It's not like they have like no lack of resources or no lack of intelligent people. And then this personal brand overshadows the firm, right? Like this is on the one hand you want the personal brand because that's how like founders then come and find you. But if the personal brand is too strong, and I would argue Kleiner had a really good brand and John had a really good brand, but you then have to like figure out how to get the other people in the organization to also rise up. And it's not easy, right? Like, and it's not something that you can just will into existence.
And also, because it's a partnership, there's no leader or leadership, right? So it's just a bunch of people working together.
There, there,
Does that play a role?
There is and there isn't. There isn't a CEO. Like it's not a command and control organization where like there's like, one person gets to run something by fiat and then everyone kind of follows. It's a partnership, right? So like your wife would get very offended if you said like I am the boss of this family, right? It doesn't work that way. And you would get offended if she said the same thing on her side, right? Like it's a partnership, but you need one person in to run at least in some of these spheres like the strategy or like but it's a discussion around the table with everybody. So it's not one person running it in the absolute. It's like one person running, managing, proposing, but the whole partnership kind of behind. Or you don't have a partnership culture at all, and you can do it like these firms don't work when like they will work as solo GPs but they'll work as partnerships, but they won't work when there's like a commanding control pen. You just don't hire the best in class people. Like the best in class people want to be autonomous, right? And they want to own these things, and like hence the partnership like nature of venture. Like they get to own this stuff, but they're in a unit environment that is collective. And yeah, and no one person can kind of dictate that by fiat, like in that respect. The founder might be able to, but then this complicates it, right? Because if you're going to do generational change, the founder has to make themselves redundant. And then you lose the ability to guide the company from like the one central source. And you really have to find the next person who can like build the company or build the firm into something even bigger. Like so you need the person because without the person, it's theoretical, right? Like so someone has to be able to rise up to that challenge, and then you have to empower them, which is more organizational, like difficult. Like, and we are going through this like right now. Like this
Yeah.
is the number. This is probably like 30% of my time right now as like a founder of the firm. Is like, how do I recruit a great group of people around the table? Like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of everybody around the table? How do I optimize for everyone's strengths? And where there are weaknesses, how do I slot in another person who can then complement? How do I make sure that the culture around the table is everyone can be open, transparent, like be very willing to debate and engage and be critical because like these things are so uncertain. You have to have like good debate. No one's going to be shy and not be like be reluctant to participate. It's like how do you really set up the cultures like a group of people? And we've never been a group. Like we've always been two, right? Historically. So how do you now go from two to a group? And then how do you make sure that some of those folks in the group are then empowered to carry the firm? Because like in 10 years, I'm hoping I'm not full time in the firm. Like, there's a new group of people that are carrying the torch in many ways. And I don't need to solve this tomorrow, but if I don't start thinking about it today, I'll be too late for the game. And that's one of the huge problems. I think a lot of people, when they think about generational change, they do it when they need to do the generational change. Like you have to like predict this stuff like 10 years in the future because you have to set all these things up. And it's not like people grow on trees like where you can say like I'm missing X, so I'm going to go find like it doesn't work that way, right? It's a very organic process to be able to like build this thing up.
Yeah. So, in your mind, you'll be part of the next three, four funds of Hoxton, or maybe two, three.
I would say definitely the next one, and I would argue
Okay.
probably the next two, and the third one is TBD. Remember, these are like 3-year funds, so like that's committing now for 6 years, and then there's a tail where you're still managing the fund for
Supporting.
another 7 years after that. if you say 6 years from now, so the next fund is probably next year, so 2024, and then the one after that is 2027, then I'm not done until 2037 or 2039. It's 2023 today, so that's like 14 years from now. I'm in my like mid to late 40s. So that will take me like close to 60. A third fund on top of that takes me like close to like my mid 60s.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot, a lot of people have when an idea of how many funds they will do, but then they don't think about transition, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I talk about this like pretty actively with my wife, like who's like, okay, like we've been really lucky, right? Like our first fund was like a really good firm. And so like from a money perspective, we did well. And our second fund is like three times the size of our first fund. And it feels like it's going down the same path. And like who knows? Like the market's much more turbulent today. Like these IPOs aren't easy. But like the market hopefully should, like by the time this fund is like at the end of life, it should be in a much better shape. And if we get to deliver on the second fund, realistically, like we probably don't need to work for a living. Like the two funds, if they're both like equally good, like set you up for life. Even the first one sets you up in many ways, and then the second one is just like at that point, money just becomes like it's just a scorekeeping thing. Like it's not a money thing, and so and then our third fund is twice the size of the second fund. So like these magnitudes get bigger, right? Because if you deliver the same performance, but you're doing it with like 10 times as much
Yeah,
capital. Know, how many of these funds do you really need to do? Now, you have to do them, right? If I step down tomorrow, like my LPs are going to be really annoyed, right? Because like it is today still a boutique. Like it is still like they're counting on me to do what I need to do. And so I'm like here for like this is my firm. Like I'm not walking away anytime soon. But like I'm starting to build in for the next 10 years where that could ultimately be a choice. So that when I'm in my 50s and my 60s, I can make that call if I want to make that call.
yeah, yeah. That's LPs was another thing that I wanted to bring up. So, do LPs make it harder for partners to build an enduring firm in the sense like they build a relationship with you and they don't necessarily trust who you bring in?
No, I would say almost the exact opposite. Like these are positive discussions. In fact, I wish LPs had more of them sometimes with us. You know, there are lots of lessons. Like we've been lucky in like Europe. Like the best fund in Europe is Index, and Index has built itself up from like a tiny organization. Like people forget how small Index was like in the mid to late 90s, and they were like almost like a project. Like they were doing SPVs, like they weren't called SPVs back then, but like they were doing deals, and then they turned it into a fund, and then they built the fund up into something that was really good in Europe. Then they made this really risky move of like opening up in the U.S. and I mean, the risky move paid off. Like they're a top fund in the U.S. and they have a growth fund, an early stage fund, the U.S. presence, a European presence. They're now in New York as well as California. Like they are like proper like institution, but they started off from very humble beginnings. So there are lots of lessons if you're an LP and Index to share with someone like me. And I do draw upon our LPs to like talk about this stuff. Like the LPs, they don't want to write like one check and then go away, right? What they want to do is like have a mechanism where they're investing in the fund is delivering for them, and the fund is doing it consecutively, like fund after fund after fund. So if this fund has longevity and can continue to perform, like that's a good thing for the LPs, not a bad thing for the LPs. The hard thing for the LPs is when they've invested in you because you and the fund are like synonymous. How do they know that the next generation is going to be as good? But like, when you think about like some of these great funds, like an Axel's a good one, like to think about, like Arthur Patterson and Jim Schwartz set it up, but the person who really put Axel on the map in many ways was Jim Breyer. And Jim was the new generation who then really took the firm, and the firm was like a good firm. Like this was not, but like really like made it like he's the guy who did the Facebook deal, right? Like Axel became like a behemoth under him, and it wasn't just him; it was like a partnership. Like there was someone else actually managing like day to day. but like he was like the inherent leader of the firm. So people have done these transitions, and so like my hope, I don't know if we're going to do it, but my hope is like our next generation like outshines me, because then the firm actually has a real chance to build a firm. Like, that would be a win, and that would be a victory for me, not like a failure. Like I want someone to be like 10 times better than me in the partnership, because then Hoxton is 30 year old. I guess.
Yeah, it's not a deal shop. So, what are the benefits of doing building an enduring firm? I mean, then you have these relationship with LPs, which makes it easier. Besides that,
I don't know if there is one advantage over the other. Like I would argue, like, there are advantages to being a solo GP and there are advantages to being in a partnership. Like, and you could make the argument either way. Like my heart is in the partnership because I think when you're surrounded by other people who are as good, if not better than you make better decisions. And if you take that away, I think I'd be a worse investor than a better investor. And similarly, I think going from like a partnership that is more of a boutique to something that is an enduring institution, there are things that institutions can do that boutiques cannot do. Like Index can now do growth investing, even though it started off doing early stage investing. So it gets multiple shots to make money. I don't know if we necessarily want to be a growth oriented investor. We've always been very rooted in early stage, but there are things that we can do as an early stage investor if we were more of an institution and less of a boutique. Is the benefits of scale of capital, scale of people, right? Even if I wanted to do a ton of stuff, if I had to do everything in the firm, I wouldn't be able to do it, right? I would just run out of capacity and run out of bandwidth. So you get some leverage by building what looks more like an organization.
yeah. And so, if you want to build a great firm, then how do you go about doing it? I guess the one thing you should not do is name it after yourself.
Yeah, I mean, even then, KPCB, like now, like referred to as Kleiner, is named after the person, like named after Eugene Kleiner. Axel is intentionally not named after a person. Like it is more generic in the title in that sense. You know, Khosla is definitely named after Vinod, and I'm not so sure Khosla like is designed to be a long-term institution. Like I don't know if that's the intent. Like there's a real question mark in my mind as to how they're gonna build that firm, because it is very much Vinod. Um, it's yeah, I mean, so I would say, yeah, probably not naming it a little bit more of an open-ended vehicle, like probably makes it a little bit easier. But I think even if it's named after a person, it doesn't. I think it's more of a where does the firm want to take itself, and I think ultimately it boils down to like who is the firm able to recruit, and like how does it think about it? This is all soft stuff, like how does it think about culture? Like, how does it think about empowering people? How does it think about like friction when there's like debate around the table? Because there's like no right answer in some of these things. Like, you know, how do you find people who are complementary but not all the same? Like, these are like this is HR stuff. Like it's soft stuff. Like that,
Yeah.
that's what you have to spend a lot of your time. And the answers are not clear cut and they're not like overnight. Like they are like long term. Like you meet people, you get to know them, you decide if you want them to come into the firm or not. Like it's like a slow motion exercise, which is why I think it takes like a lot of like free thought to be able to do this. Like you have to be planning way in advance of actually when you need it to do it well. And I think the more open, I would argue, the more open you are as a culture, the more equal you are as a culture, like from an economics perspective, the more you tolerate debate and dissent as a group, the easier it is to build these types of things. But at the same time, you have to unify around the same core theme. Like if you have 5 people, 7 people that each want to do totally different types of things, and there's lots of dissent of opinion, like lots of good friction in that sense. There's not a unifying theme pulling everyone in the same direction. It's it's probably going to fracture, right? And we've seen firms fracture before. Like people forget this, but like the precursor to Lightspeed was a fund called Weispeck and Greer. And Weispeck and Greer basically split in two, and one half of it became Lightspeed. And so you think of Lightspeed as this very long-term firm, but it was like rooted in this thing called Weispeck, which didn't last. You know, there were young folks who left other firms to form Red Point, like around the same time the benchmark set up. And those old firms then kind of went away because the young guard went off to go build a new firm. Like you need these unifying themes, and if you don't have them, like you cause stress fractures in these partnerships. This is all like it's all like hard stuff, as in because it's human, like it's not robotic or mechanical. Like it's a lot of ambiguity and uncertain answers, and like more like the direction you want to go versus like the prescriptive things. It's not like an HR guideline that you produce with like 20 pages and like that's what everyone. It's not like that.
Yeah. So besides recruiting, it's also like developing people that you bring in, right? Like you said, young people with venture, you make more mistakes. So then you need to guide them over a period of time. I think a lot of firms do that, especially with the investing team. But let's say if you look at a fund like Sequoia or Axel, there are these other operations members and other supporting members, right? There is no sort of like, what do those guys do?
uh,
Like, what is the progression for those guys?
So there isn't much of a progression but there isn't much of a progression in venture, period, right? Like, so even on the investing side, I mean, people have these like analyst, associate, principal, VP, like type of hierarchy, but there's basically like partners who write the check, right, and non-partners who help the partners. And at some point, the non-partners want to become partners. Like, so call the title whatever you want, make as many layers as you want. I think the later stage you are, the more work you have to do, the more layers you need because you need, like, there's delegated work that you can kind of give. The earlier stage you go, the more flat it needs to be because there's really not that much work to do. So either you understand or don't understand. So even within early stage, there's not many levels in the investing side. And similarly, there are not many levels on the back office side, like the support, you know. But we run these are partnerships, right? Once you make partner, there's not like there's no next, like there's no part like senior partner or man, like it is a partnership. In a 6 person, 7 person, 10 person organization, it doesn't make sense to have like these kinds of things. And similarly, like so we have a head of legal who's like super strong, like she's really good, and I think she will probably like I hope that she will stay in that job. Like there are lots of new things that keep coming up on the legal side, like safes weren't around 10 years ago, right? So like there is like real impact, but like it's a question of do you want to be the best lawyer first? Like, do you want to be the best lawyer in the world in this context of a venture fund? And you can do that and be the best. And then you get paid as the funds scale and there's more carry coming. We share our carry with our back office as well. There's a financial reward for being inside the firm and being the best lawyer in the firm. But there isn't like a job after that, right? This is like in some respects, venture is very artisanal. And, you know, once you're an artisan, there's no next
Yeah.
step. This is kind of what you do for the rest of your life. And the same is true on our back office. Our head of finance is very good. And then I think over time the back office is a little bit different because as you get bigger of the firm, it's impossible to support. We used to support the entire firm on the back office side with no people. Like it was just me and Rob doing it, and then one person. And now we have like 4 or 5 people in the back office, and we will probably end up scaling that to 5, 6, 7 people because like they will need some juniors because there's more funds to manage, right? So there's more work to do. The investing side doesn't scale up nearly the same way from a junior perspective, but even the investing side, like we're looking for more partners to kind of join the firm because we're scaling up. But once you get to kind of your steady state, you know, this is a job where you have to enjoy the job, not the growth of the firm, right? Like it's like I do this like that's why I said I'm very neutral on institution versus boutique. I do this because I love investing and I love like finding these companies and being a board member. Like I don't need a promotion or to do some new thing. In fact, actually managing the firm is like a new thing for me. And if I had an idea, like people, this will sound counterproductive, but like it's my firm, so like I owe it to myself to do these kinds of things. If I had a choice to like have a job back at Axel and someone else is running all the day to day, and I just get to focus on my investing, I actually think I'd do that. Like I would have a like I love the investing job so much. I do the managing job because it's like my firm, and so I have to think about that. But if I didn't have to think about that, and I could just focus purely on investing, I focus purely on investing. Like I don't want to run a firm. Like I just want to do my deals and make sure like the company has become as successful as possible. That's what gives me motivation. But I have to spend like I said, I'm spending like 30% of my time, like a very large portion of my time thinking about this stuff. But I have to, right? Because if I don't, there's no one else around the firm to do it. And Excel, like I would be very happy Jim Breyer gets to do that, and I just go back to investing. Like not Jim anymore, he's left, but it would be the extra stuff is not like stuff that gets me super excited or like makes me feel like some people love running things because like they want to be the boss. Like I don't want to be the boss. Like I just want to do my investing job. And I think most people who are on the venture side just kind of want the platform to take care of itself. They don't want to worry about fundraising. Like they don't want to worry about the stuff that adds friction. They just want all the friction to go away, and then they can purely focus on like how to generate returns.
Yeah, this is exactly the reason why there are not many firms. Yeah. Um, Also, could you please explain to me how the incentives are like aligned across partners and also the back office? Because I read somewhere that it takes 2 to 3 funds for the partners to build up their carry in the fund. What does that mean? I didn't fully understand that.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I understand. I mean, I think generally speaking, I mean, these firms are all kind of 2 and 20 structures. And there's lots of variations.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of firms of 2.5, and then some firms are as much as 30. But basically, 2% a year comes to the company, to the management company to pay salaries, et cetera. And it declines over time. So it's 2% at the investment period. And then there's different firms have different formulas. So basically the fees drop, which is why you have an incentive to raise a new fund, so that there's a new pot of money kind of coming in to kind of keep the lights on. you know, and then whatever you generate in the way of like profits, 20% of that kind of comes to you, and 80% goes back to the LPs after you've either paid everything back. And in some cases in Europe, it's like a hurdle. Like Americans don't have it, Europeans do. You have to give a little, you can't just give the cash back. You have to give the cash back in order to something. But like once you're past that, you're profit sharing with the firm. The carry takes years to materialize, like because
Yeah.
you don't have like the big exits, the IPOs, and like the big mega acquisitions. I mean, maybe you're really lucky and that happens in like year two, but that's very unusual. Like it takes a long time to build the good companies. It takes a lot less time to lose the bad companies because they run out of cash, right? They kind of go bust. So you're playing for the carry, but it's like a 10 year, it's a 10-year horizon. And like you start getting real carry in year 7, 8, 9, 10, not in years 1, 2, 3. And then if these funds are over like, every 3 years apart, you know, it's like 15, 20 years until like you get the material, and these funds get bigger over time. Like, and so the carry, ideally, if the fund multiple is the same, and the carry pot is much bigger. It just takes a long time to be able to earn the carry and kind of get the carry. And then on the management company side, this 2% like keeps stacking at every single fund. It takes a while. Like when you're tiny, you basically pay yourself very little, like because there's not much fee income. But if you end up building $1 billion fund, you have a surplus of fee income. And so the hard part is how does that fee income, like the carry is easy, right? If you're investing and you're making money and you're generating big outcomes, you get a cut of what you're generating, right? Like that is more open and shut. It's hard for someone who says, I built the firm 20 years ago. I should get a big stake of carry in the thing that you did, because you may not be around. It's clear that the carry, the over, like maybe a little bit of the profit goes to the person who was there before, but really the bulk of the profits gets shared by the people who are actually generating profits. The management income, which eventually gets large, but is never large in the early days, the people who sacrifice to put that stuff together in the early days, should they get any of it in the future years? And how do you distribute that? Like, especially once it starts generating surpluses, like all this out. Like there's a time where you're basically subsidizing the firm because the firm doesn't make enough money on its own to really do this. And you might be subsidizing it by just taking like a way below market salary. You may also be putting money into the company, but eventually like, the firm becomes like $1 billion fund. They can pay everyone's salaries like without blinking. It has surplus profits. In Company's House, you can look at like the surplus profits of like a Bulbichet or an Axel and Atomica. The highest person at Axel this year, I think, was paid £7 million, and like as like a distribution from the management company, not profit share. This is like effectively salary. It's a big number, right?
Whoa.
£7 million, like is a big number. So these profits can get very, very large, especially partnerships don't grow like purport like they don't grow by the same size. So as they get bigger and bigger in terms of funds, they don't necessarily grow by the number of people the same way. So you get surpluses. Um, and I don't know if there's a good formula for this. Like, I think the best formula that I heard is like as you're retiring and stepping off, you basically get a little bit of a tail. So you continue doing your board work. You don't get your full amount of salary, etc. And it kind of winds down and kind of tapers off. And you might get a little bit from the next one for having served like a long tenure inside the firm. The firm basically takes care of you, and then it tapers off eventually to kind of zero in the new guard that kind of gets all this stuff. And that way, the old guard who put up some of the sacrifice get a little bit of reward, and the new guard gets most of the reward in like after a certain amount of time. But this is like where it's not clear cut. It's not like there's a book written on this stuff. It's not super like I feel like venture has become super transparent about like deals. Like there was a time where people thought like the term sheets were black boxes because like, but now they're like blog posts. Like everyone understands like liquidation for like it's just very well understood. The mechanics of like how GPs and like partners inside of funds and how partnerships kind of divide up the spoils, like both on fees as well as carry, like it's in people's heads, but it's in the people's heads who are in the firms who've done all this stuff. And many of these firms have iterated, like they haven't come up with the perfect formulas that have changed over time to try and figure out how to balance all these competing interests. How do you take care of the old guard, and how do you make sure the new guard like is also paid fairly? And like you learn, I think, sort of by screwing up, right? Like you end up with like a superstar in the company who then leaves to go join another fund or go start their own fund, and you're like, um, and why did they do this? It like usually boils down to culture and economics, and so then you have to iterate on culture and economics so that it doesn't happen again the next time around. So like, but all of that knowledge is like it's like very much of a black box. It's in the firms who've done it before. It's not like widely available on podcasts or blog posts, etc. Like people don't talk about it like all that much. And the other people who kind of sort of know, but again, a little bit indirectly, are sometimes the LPs who've seen these constructions. So I've relied on other founding VCs and LPs to help me fill in the gaps to say what's worked, what hasn't worked, like how do you really make this? And one thing that from a principal perspective that we were there from day one is we're just always going to divide the pot equally on the carry side. So as we add another person, we just divide by n+1, and we think about that like because then do you really want to share like an equal slice of the pie? If the pie is going to be fixed, then no, right? If the pie is going to grow, then yeah. So it like forces you to think about like growth in the firm in many ways. And the management fee side, we haven't figured out yet. Like we don't know what the right answer is. Like we are still iterating through how to do this. And again, I'm not thinking about like today. We figured it out for today. I'm thinking like 10 years from now, like when I'm gone, or 20 years from now when I'm gone. Like how does this really work, and how does it stay in a virtuous cycle for everybody? So like you don't have to keep coming back to it and revisiting it every single fund cycle. It's not. I haven't figured out the answer. I'm like super happy to take advice from anybody who has figured it out because I haven't seen a formula that seems to me like make perfect sense.
So, in terms of carry, I thought that you only get carry for the deals that you led.
No, no, it depends on the firm. Like so some people, sorry, some firms do that. Like whatever you did, you get, and then maybe the firm takes a tax on that. And, so 70, like, making, like, it's these, again, every firm is different, right? So maybe you generate some wealth, 75% of that flows to you, 25% goes back to the firm and gets distributed across everybody. The challenge with that is you're working in a power law industry where it is very unlikely that you will have more than one outlier in the fund that generates
Yeah.
the vast majority of the wealth. And you probably have four, five, six people working in that firm. So one person ends up getting lucky. Now, if the same person gets lucky fund after fund after fund after fund, like all the outliers are always in one person's camp and not in other people's camps. But we all know that certain markets get hot and certain markets get cold. And some of these outliers are driven by what's hot in the market, right? Like because you're predicting 10 years in the future and you don't know what's going to get hot. So maybe this time the enterprise software business that so and so did is the one that generates all the wealth. But the next time will be the consumer internet company that another person did that generates all the wealth. And if you give 75% of that wealth to the person who did it and not back into the pot, then, you know, the other people are going to get very disenfranchised and the firm kind of falls apart, right? So if you concentrate too much of the thing into the person who did the deal, then the person who did the deal benefits a lot and is really happy, but everyone else is disgruntled. If, on the other hand, you give very little of the thing to the person who did the deal, then that person quits, and the person who was the rainmaker in your firm is now frustrated and is gone. And so that doesn't
Yeah.
work. And I think the cleanest, and a few funds have now done this, like Benchmark was famously the pioneer for this. We've done it, but
Equal.
I've heard, yeah, it's just divide people. Like that just makes it really easy. I have heard of the most complicated version is a Swedish firm that I know that every year sits around the table and like this is hard. The partners reallocate it amongst themselves. So they talk amongst themselves and they say, well, let's like seriously take a look at ourselves and what we're each contributing into this partnership. And so and so is contributing a lot more because they've done way more of the more interesting investments. So maybe I should give up some of my carry and give it over to that person. And they rebalance. Like, I mean, imagine the level of trust that you need to do that because it's not the person saying give me more, it's the other people around the table saying take more. Like because if the person is saying give me more, it's a pretty awkward conversation. Like it's like people are just going to get annoyed, right? So like it's hard, right, to do this. I don't know if that model works. I mean, I think it works for them. I don't know if that works all that well. It just seems really hard. It also seems really hard to do that every year because it keeps changing and like these are 10-year cycles and one year to the next, I don't know if you really know all that much and what's like hop in is hot one year and then not so hot the next year. Like I just, do you read, like it just seems weird to me, but I haven't been inside those cultures where people have done that. So, and then most people have a much more rigid hierarchical thing where the senior people take a cut, the junior people get less, and you get something correlated to what you did, but it may not be fair, but it's not so unfair that you're not willing to quit your job over it. So you're annoyed, but not annoyed enough to make like big life changes, and then you just wait till the next year. Like it's like it's these are like there aren't very clean ways, which is why I think we just said the easiest, cleanest. It doesn't require very much explanation. We live and die as a team. We will divide the
Yeah.
spoils as a team. And by the way, you asked me
Okay.
earlier, like, what about the back
Back
office?
office.
What do we
Yeah.
do? Yeah, so we don't give the same amount as the people who are doing the deals. We give, it's less, but we make sure that they're also cut in. Like from a principal perspective, we care about this. Now, there's some weird tax things. Like I would love to give like even our assistants carry in the fund because like to me it's a philosophical thing but you get taxed and there's a lot of paperwork that you have to do in Europe that you don't have to do in the US. We basically do something that's more like synthetic carry, which is like a really large bonus, which gets them to the same thing without having to go like the amount of form. Like when I file my US tax return, it's like literally like this much paper. Like it is really, really, really large as a return. I don't know if someone who's earning less than 100K as an assistant should have to go through like 5,000 pounds of expenses just to file a tax return, or whether we should just like synthetically come up with what that carry number would be and then just pay it out as like a one-time bonus. We are working through that. We didn't have PAs like 2 years ago. we did all of our own calendaring by ourselves, and that doesn't sustain. So like we now have to think about this, but we want everyone in the firm to be invested for the long term. If we like make money as a firm, like you know, they deserve like the profits as well, right? Like because we wouldn't be able to do our jobs without them.
Yeah. And when it comes to doing this right, the chunk of it is what you already spoke about, as in like bringing people in and thinking about how you're going to be leaving. So there are three things, right? Like the firm has to identify people, and then the people who are identified needs to believe. In your case, you said that the two people want to grow with the firm, and the third thing is that LPs has to trust your judgment on the new people in the to generate the same level of returns as you have. So these are the three
Yeah.
things, right?
Yep, exactly. And I think the LP takes a while, like because they don't know, right? They're strained, like they it takes like a cycle before people realize that.
Yeah. And ideally, if somebody like, when did you start thinking about it after starting the firm? Like how many years after?
So when we set up the firm, it was I describe it as a project, and the challenge with projects is you don't even know if the project's going to work. Like, and you also don't know if the project's going to serve. So even if it works, you don't know if the project's going to survive. And it took us like I've been pretty public about this. It took us 39 months to raise our first fund. It's like it was really like a labor of love and persistence to get this darn thing off the ground. We started to do well. We thought we were doing well. The rest of the world had no idea if we were doing well. And our second fund took 28 months to raise. So I would say like first fund and second fund were both like very much like projects. The second fund was bigger than the first fund, so it gave us a little bit of budget to then think about how to remove some of the back office load. And we hired a really good COO who's both a lawyer and a finance guy, which is like a very strange combination. You don't normally see that, but you need someone like that in the firm to be able to, if you want to hand over the keys, and they can only do the law, but they can't do like math and accounting, like you can't really hand over the keys. And if they're only an accountant, so much of our job is legal, you can't really that doesn't work either. So like we found the great person to like run it, and then it came out of project, and we ended up into this boutique mode, right, where it's it's viable, not dying anytime soon, but it's a boutique. Like it doesn't really have the surplus cash to scale it up into something much bigger. It can only really survive as a boutique. It's great if it's very artisanal. It lets you do what you need to do. And then our third fund, which is double the size of our second fund, gave us the budget to now say, okay, we can stay as a boutique, and like we can add one or two people, and we can pay ourselves a lot more money, et cetera, as a result of doing this, or we can use the extra money that we have to invest and actually build something that's a bigger institution. And we started talking to people about like, hey, if we want to recruit you and we want you to join this kind of platform, which we think we've gotten off the ground and it's a good platform, like we're a known fund now, that we're not unknown, like we can raise capital, our returns are good. It was very clear from the people that we're talking to, at least the people that we resonated with, is like, oh wow, okay, you built something, it's like a real thing. Like, let's now like really take it to the next level. And so like now you like the people that we're bringing in don't want us to be a boutique. They want us to be thinking about an institution, and we that's the transition that we've kind of made. And so we have started to like it's a slow process, right? Like we are nowhere near like we're like in the early innings still of where this is going to go, but like that's the mental frame. And so you're trying to recruit people in now to like fill out the pieces, and you're slowly going to start to expand the firm into not just doing seed investing, but probably doing a little bit more than seed investing. So ultimately you can be looks like much more like a multi-stage early stage firm than just a pure seed firm. Pure seed firm and boutique go hand in hand in many ways, right? But as you build something bigger, you want to be able to have more shots on goal. You probably end up starting to look at Series A's over time. Like again, we're not tomorrow, but like probably over time. And this the firm starts becoming more of a firm and takes its own personality as opposed to the personality of the people who are there in the early days.
Yeah. And one of the big challenges when you start doing this is like, what if people leave? Like, especially when you take a lot of time to find, identify, and bring them in. So, uh, Yeah, how do you prevent this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to get these hires. Like hiring in venture is very different than hiring in a corporate. It's probably more like hiring in a startup where every job is precious. And if you lose like key people early on, the whole thing has a danger of unraveling. And, in a corporate, like GSK or Pfizer, like you bring in a VP, it doesn't work. It's like you're Ozempic, right? You're Novo Nordisk, that
Yeah.
doesn't threaten your Ozempic franchise, right? Like, the business is very sustainable, irrespective of the people in many ways. When you're a tiny company and you're like four people, five people, it's a startup, like every hire kind of counts. I would say venture partnerships are more like the startup side, like every partner kind of counts. You know, it's no secret, like we are losing one of our partners, like we're basically, we're separating and kind of going our own ways. Philosophically, we want to build something that looks much more like a platform and much more like an institution. And I think Rob, the person who's leaving, very much wants to build what looks more like a boutique. And one of the philosophical differences, I don't know if he's actually going to end up doing it or not, because his new fund is very focused on like tech bio, deep tech, like much more research. And there's a lot of reasons for why you do this, right? There's a lot of innovation in the UK specifically and in Europe that is world class science and not yet turning into world class companies. Like there's a scarcity of this. Like we produce a lot of great stuff. We don't necessarily turn them into great businesses. So
Commercialize.
yeah, and so we are undercapitalized from that. Like there are not enough people doing it. We do that investing as well as Hoxton. I think what he wanted to do at one point, he was talking about this, was like hire scientists onto his team or like research associates who, could help him figure out what the scientific merit of these projects were. And all of a sudden you then end up in a partnership where one person has like five staff and the other partners who are not doing all the same kinds of science stuff have no staff. And, you can't have an equal partnership where one person is very different and has a very different model than the other. Like either everyone is on one model or like or not, right? So we agreed, and like we had a really good run. Like we've made lots of money together. We built a really good firm together. But he's going off and building his own firm to do it in a very philosophically different way than what we're doing. In many ways, it's very similar, right? Because we think alike, like we're trained the same way, like we think about the world very differently. That's why we've been good investors together because we're unified. But philosophically, the kind of firm that he wants to build, the kinds of people that he wants to put around himself is very different than the kinds of people that like Hoxton wants to have around them. They're philosophical differences. They're it and you have to make, you can't run both in parallel, like, because then you end up causing like a fracture within the firm. So you have to kind of make these hard choices. And we made the hard choice, and he made the hard choice of like, basically going off. I'm an LP in his new thing. Like, it's a very friendly, nice, like, it's a good splitting up in many ways, but, it is still a splitting up. I think that one worries us less than what happens if like one of these new folks. So we just hired Brian, from Khosla, who joined us, and he was 7 years in Insight. You know, if Brian leaves, like I am investing heavily in this new guard, like that will be much more of a shock to the system than this like gentle parting of ways with Rob. Like, because that was like a philosophical thing and like almost slow motion, like, after like 10 years of making money. Like, I don't want my new people who are like very invested in like building this institution. In many ways, the reason why we're going down the institutional route versus the boutique route to like walk away and like be frustrated that they're not being paid fairly or like there's better opportunities. So like I'm spending a lot of cycles with people I'm talking to about like do they buy in? Like is this the kind of home that they really want to be in for the next like 10, 20, 30 years? Because I am taking a huge bet as a founder on them and I don't want them to like leave. And by the way, like there's always this danger, right? Like, you know, Luciana was like the heir apparent in many ways at Axel, and then Sequoia recruited her. And it's not like she did a bad thing. Like if Sequoia calls you, like that's a call that you should take. Like there's some real reasons for why she switched. Like, you know, maybe Sequoia will call Brian. I really hope that they don't. But like, there may be some like it may not be perfect in this sense. But this is like, a departure would be a bad thing for me or for the firm.
Yeah, but it's also a risky move for the person, right? Because with Hoxton, he's part of the established firm, and when you're going out on your own, that's a risky move, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it is. So he was a partner at Khosla, and he was in the middle of things in Silicon Valley, right? So there's two things, right? It's like picking up and coming across, you know, from Silicon Valley, which, yeah, is no longer as much of the center of the world in tech, but is still like a pretty important place in the middle. Like it's where the action is. And coming to London, he has an English wife, so that helps a little bit. Like so, there's some reasons for family reasons to be here. And then he talked to a lot of firms, like, and the culture was like a huge thing. Like when I first met Brian, he gave me a book called Willful Blindness, and it was a book on like how do you build like radical transparency and open conversations that are very honest, even if they might be a little bit painful. How do you build a system inside of a firm to allow those conversations to flourish without people feeling bad? Because if you can do that, you build a really strong core inside of the firm. You have a very good relationship inside the firm. And so, you find someone like this wasn't me asking about this stuff. This was him saying, like, I've been thinking about these kinds of things. I've seen what works in other firms. He was at Inside Coast, so I've seen what doesn't work. Like, I am spending a lot of my energy on trying to find a firm that is very aligned with like how I want a firm to actually behave and kind of be. There was a lot of good like kind of buy-in on that side. We got very very lucky with that hire in many ways, but we have to now do this like a couple of times. We did the same thing with Peyton, and like Peyton, 17 years at Google, like he's had a great career. Like I remember one time like where we were all meeting as a firm, and he was an advisor to us. And it was the day that Bard was launched, and like he was back and forth with Sundar. Like it wasn't like a junior guy. Like he had great opportunities at Google, and we were able to convince them to like, look, like you had a really good run in Google. You make a lot of money by the way, Google. Like you can, like they take very good care of you. Then you can do that for the rest of your life, like if you want to, or you can kind of go build this institution that is like a much more fledgling institution. And your 40s can be about like almost reinventing your career and doing something new. And we think you'd be a really good like person around the table, on the investing side, to kind of learn that, even if you're not a natural investor, like you haven't been doing that at Google. And so like that was another really good hire. And again, like spends a lot of time. In many ways, I think Peyton like does a lot of the day-to-day running, well, alongside of Rob, our COO, versus me. And I kind of want to push that right over to those two, so I can like go back to like thinking a lot more about investing. But I can't push the people side and the culture side nearly as much, because that has to come from me as the person who's been like who set the whole thing up and has to kind of get this thing into motion.
Yeah. And I know it's not a great thing for the firm for people to leave, but then for the industry in general, is it a good thing if people go out and start new funds? Because one thing, one data shows that the first two funds perform really well, and then the
Yeah.
performance drops.
So more than that, it's like if you get to fund four, it's a 20% chance of success that you will. So sorry, before I say that a little bit more clearly, 80% of the funds that get started never get to fund four. So by the time you're at fund four, you're in a 1 in 5 survivorship bias. Like most firms set up, they may or may not do well, but by the time they get to fund two, fund three, they have like internal fractures, they lose steam, people decide they want to go do other things, they never make it to fund four. So I don't know how many of the fund fours then go on to be great, right? That's the real question. That's actually a good question for me to go research. Like, but we're at fund three going into fund four. We'll do fund four like in 2024. So like we're at that cusp. I would hope that we get fund four done, which would put us into like pretty rare company, because most firms don't do this. There are a lot of people who like leave their firms and kind of go, especially today, where there are like lots of solo GPs, and capital's been really inexpensive. It's been really easy to raise LP capital, and then the friction of setting up a fund. Like when we set up, like you need a fund administrator, et cetera. Like now there's like AngelList and Bobbin, and there's infrastructure to make it very easy to take away the stuff that like that normally like you need to be in a fund to be able to do that. Now you don't need to be in a fund. There's service providers who can do that stuff for you. So it's very easy to be a solo operator. I philosophically think you are a better investor if you're around the table with other people. I would speak for myself. Like I make mistakes. I don't see stuff sometimes. Like I sometimes like miss perspective, both in a good way and a bad way. Like I miss the forest for the trees because like I can't go up a level, or I'm so buried in like, oh, I'm so at the up level that I miss the little data point that says maybe there's some like a structural weakness here. And having that, and I'm pretty good about getting to the right answer. I'm not a bad investor, but having that debate and having people who can challenge you, can't I could not survive as a solo GP. Like I think it would be really hard to do this job and to do it entirely by yourself in a vacuum, like where you can't you don't have other people to look at the lens and to help you come up to a better perspective. I fall into the it's much better to be in a firm. Now the problem with being in a firm is you often have to deal with things that you may not want to deal with. Right? You have to share with other people, right? You have to share economics, you have to share a seat around the table. I would much rather share because I think it makes you a better investor. And I think it's really hard. Like you see some of these like solo GPs and they've been really good at pre-seed and seed, but like will they stand the test of time? Will like the next $50 billion companies come from like the solo operators, or will they be coming out of the venture funds that are traditionally like would do that? They overwhelmingly feel to me more like the venture type things. Like the solo things are good, but I don't know if they build exceptional the same way the venture stuff does. And then the problem with the venture stuff is you have to get along with everybody. And, you're inside of a partnership, right? With all partnership, like you have to compromise. Like you do it in like personal life when you get married. Like it doesn't always go your way, but like you're better together than you are by yourself. It's the same thing, except now you have like 4 or 5 people to do that with versus one person to do that with. And you have to like really get along with each other. Otherwise, like you can't survive the hard times, like when they're knocks, and there are lots of knocks in this business.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, I recorded a podcast with a solo GP on why solo GPs are winning, and I think the argument there is that they can move fast, right? Like there is no bureaucracy, there is no legacy portfolio companies, and then they can quickly make decisions.
Yes, I would push back on that. They can move fast, but there is no reason why a good firm can't also move fast. So a solo GP can, like, it's their decision, right? But you should be able to convene your partners if it's like an emergency and make it and get the deal done. Like, we don't like losing, whether you're a solo or you're in a team. Like, we don't like losing. Like, so like that's a cultural thing. And then this idea that you have no legacy portfolio companies, that's only true in year one and maybe year three. But like you get to like year 10, like where I am, so I think the solo GP job is like a gazillion times harder because like you'd have all of the portfolio companies and no one with you. Like I think a solo GP naturally lends itself, like you naturally morph into something that looks more like a firm at some point because it is, or you say I'm passive. I'm not going to do port seats. Like I'm not going to be that involved because my job is to pick companies. Yeah, I don't know. For all of the companies that I know that turn out to be great, they're never that linear. Like there is a job for someone to push back. And I think a lot of the good venture folks were good not at building the companies, but we're good at being the sounding boards behind the founders and pushing back when it like again it goes back to like why I like working in a partnership. It's the same relationship with the entrepreneur. And 2 plus 2 gets you more than 4 in those kinds of like very positive relationships. Both people walk away with more energy than less energy. And the problem is most people do this job badly. And so people then zoom in on the bad and say it doesn't work. But the truth is like if you do it well, it works so much better. And you have to then figure out how to build a system that works well because it's a power law business again, right? So like it doesn't matter if the average it's like you want to build a strong marriage, right? Like you want to be like, we know that they're like 50% of people get divorced, but like that's the average. You don't want to be at the average. You want to be in the outlier, and you want to make it like a really healthy, good place. And if you do that well, both people in the relationship benefit. Like it's much more impactful, much more positive, not just for one, but like for both people. Like it's a better unit in that, but it's a hard unit to make work. So it goes back to this culture thing: is how do you then design the firm to do that? And I wish there was
Yeah.
like a cheat sheet. Like I wish there was like a podcast I could listen to, but like you kind of feel like you have to talk to a lot of people and then invent it kind of yourself, like in many ways, right? Because there aren't people that kind of teaching these kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like marriage, it's hard. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. This was great.
Yeah. And I'm trying to be like as open as possible because like I don't think I have the answers on a lot of this stuff. So, these are things, but these are like active things that we are like, this is where literally a third of my like energy is these kinds of things internally. Like, and we will see if we get it right. Like, I think we've been a really good project going into boutique, and we will see in the next 10 years if we go from boutique to institution. So, like, I think history is the only way to figure out if we're actually going to be any good at this.